Welcome to OverBoost 38. OverBoost is a podcast interview series featuring discussions with speedrunners about their history in speedrunning and gaming and the runs they're passionate about. I am your host, PMC Trilogy, and with me today is Rico. Rico, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Now, I am excited because when I'm scoping out guests for these, one of the things I'm thinking about is I want to cover some current event stuff. Some recent stuff that you've worked on to sort of start off the interview, because I always feel like that's sort of, the freshest stuff to talk about, can get into things. And one of the other things I do when I scope out guests, of course, is I just follow them on social media, right? I follow them on Twitter, trying to get a sense of, who they are, would they be a good guest and everything. And I followed you on Twitter right around the time that you started doing a top 20 favorite games of all time. And so I've seen you, fill in this list because you each, I don't know, is it every day or is it?
It was every weekday, and
okay.
It's something I've done every other year. I tried to make it a yearly thing, and then realized that after about a year, my opinions didn't really change that much.
How long have you been doing it?
Every other. I think my first one was 2017. Yeah, like I got the idea from Cat Icarus, the YouTuber. He did one for Christmas where it was his top 25, and he released a video daily. And I just thought to myself, I don't have the time or patience to do a video, but I could do like a Twitter or Facebook post every weekday. So I just did it in January, and I really liked it. So I did it again 2 years later. So now it's just kind of a biannual thing.
Yeah, if you're in here live, I just put the link to, it's currently your pinned tweet. So if you're listening to this also, you can go to Rico's Twitter and you can see that the finished 2021 edition is presented. Has the list changed a lot since 2017, or is it, because a lot of these games are pre-2017, so I'm curious.
So a lot of the top 10, I would say, is mostly the same. I think the biggest thing that was different there is that Jack 2 actually fell a lot. The last time I did a full list for that, it was, I think, 5th, and this time it was 12th. And it wasn't really of my opinion of the game dropping. It was kind of more just the opinion of games around it rising.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other one was Spider-Man on PS4 was 8th, where the last time I did a list, it was 2nd, but that was also the year it came out, so it had a lot of recency bias around it. And I still think that game is fantastic. It was more just, again, my opinion about the games around it was rising. And then other than that, it was a lot of just minor shifts in placement, and then some games that might not have been on the list before just made it on there. But yeah, no, this one was pretty different, I guess, from the last one I did, which was pretty cool about it.
Do you feel like you have a particular question that you use to evaluate the games in your mind? Would you say which game would I rather play right now, or some other kind of way that you're using to rank them?
It's really complex, because I feel like I don't have a very black and white way that I look at games. And I also am absolutely not somebody who follows whatever the common consensus opinion is. If you check the tweet that you linked, my favorite game is Kingdom Hearts 1, which anybody who likes the Kingdom Hearts series, 99% of the time, they're going to say the best one is Kingdom Hearts 2 by a lot.
That's me. Yeah. I would do that.
I will also clarify that if I didn't restrict myself to one game per franchise, Kingdom Hearts 2 would be the second game on that list.
Okay.
I do adore both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, I guess, there's just so many factors going on. How much did I love the game when I played it? How much do I love it when I just think about it? So many minor details about the game, its design, the way it plays. And I don't really even factor in whether or not the game is particularly well made, because the Crash game that I ended up on, that was Crash Twinsanity, and nobody in their right mind would tell you that game is functional in the way they meant it to be. But that doesn't even matter to me. I've seen so many people give that game a bad rap just because they're oh, well, it's broken and it's not even finished, and I'm just looking at it and I'm I don't even care. It's just really fun, and I love so many things about it. So
So I had a few specific questions about some of the games on the list because I felt like I saw some opportunities here to elicit takes. One of those was I see UT2K4, a classic game, is here on the list. What's your favorite game mode in UT2K4?
Ooh, it's been a few years since I played it, but I played a lot of UT from actually about when I was pretty young. It was one of the few M-rated games that my dad would let me play, which is why I'm so attached to it. But I played it up until about high school, and I guess by the time I was in high school, the mode I played the most was Onslaught, and that's just because one of my best friend in high school, he would just come over and we would just play Onslaught against bots for hours on end. But before that, I really like Capture the Flag. I like Bombing Run, and then there's always just the classic death matches, really fun. I think there was also like a modded game mode that my dad had once. I think it was called Jailbreak. That one was really sick, but I don't know how well known that one is.
All right, and then so that was UT. I also was curious with some of these other games. There have been sequels or other versions. So like with World Ends With You. Is the DS version still the definitive one for you, or did you ever play the Switch one?
I never played the Switch one, and I remember when hearing about it, like the consensus I would always hear is that it's a very great game that you shouldn't play because I guess I guess the DS version is just that much better. So The World Ends With You is like one of those games that I only played once, but like it left an impact on me. So it's like even if I don't have a huge amount of fond memories of it, the ones I do have, I remember really liking it. So it ended up on the list.
No, that's fair. I had only played that game for the first time, I think in 2017. I was actually when I was traveling to ESA. I had played it on an actual DS, and it was good.
Yeah, it definitely really takes advantage of what the DS can do. So that might be why some people think it's like the Switch version, even if it's good, it's not nearly as good.
Right.
So, then, I don't have any opinion on like any version besides the DS one.
By law, since we haven't quite escaped the gravity of 2020 yet, I'm required to ask about do you have Last of Us Part 2 takes?
So I actually didn't hate the game.
Okay.
I don't really have a problem with most of the narrative. I don't have a problem with the big thing at the beginning of the game that everybody had an issue with. That I won't mention by name in case people haven't played it and want to. Like I actually thought that was going to happen before I even started the game. I was like this is so going to happen. Like really my only issue, my biggest issue with that game is that it's too long. I don't know how common of a take this is, but I really don't like how so many games are starting to become like 25 to 30 hour campaigns.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I'm like 26 years old and I just don't have time for that. But a lot of the times I feel like these games, they pad things out unnecessarily just for the sake of hitting that threshold, because I guess they feel consumers will feel like they wasted $60 if they can't throw like 30 million hours into a game. But I feel like The Last of Us Part 2 did not need to be that long. I know the first game was only like a 16-hour campaign, but it was the perfect length. And so much of, especially the back half of The Last of Us Part 2 just didn't feel necessary. I still stand by the belief that the entire final act didn't need to happen. Like the game could have ended 3 hours earlier. So for me, I didn't really hate the game. I just felt like it overstayed its welcome. And this is also an issue I had with Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is why the original is on that list.
Okay.
I was so close to loving Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I wanted to love Final Fantasy VII Remake because I adore the original game, and just like it didn't need to be the length of the original game when it covers 20% of it. So like that was the biggest thing. That one also just overstayed its welcome. Like I would much rather take a game being too short than one being too long. Because like if a game is too short, like yeah, it kind of sucks that like you go through it so quickly. But if the game's really good, I have no problem going through it again. If a game is too long, it doesn't matter how good it is. I'll be very hesitant to revisit it. Like again, going back to Final Fantasy VII, I adore that game, and I think it's an example of a game that completely deserves to be 35 hours long because it's very densely packed with a bunch of stuff that doesn't feel like filler. but it's still a 35-hour game, so I'm very hesitant to revisit it, even though it's absolutely one of the best games I've ever played.
No, I definitely hear you there about the length and the need for length, and especially as that relates to that like perceived consumer narrative effect. Oh my god, I can't believe this game was only 10 hours, and I spent X amount of dollars on it, and I'm like, well, what if it was really fun though? As someone with a day job, I would much rather pay $60 for a really fun 10-hour game. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. I mean, of course, it's harder for kids, right? Because then you have way more time than money, so it gets flipped around.
I feel like that also probably affected Crash 4, because if you ever the biggest criticism with Crash 4 is 106% is so repetitive, so long, so brutal, and as much as I love Crash 4, I agree. I haven't 106% of that game because I just can't be asked to. And it's like, I feel like probably part of the reason they did that was so they could justify a $60 price tag for it, so people wouldn't complain. Because the game was announced and people were just being like, "Why is a Crash Bandicoot game $60?" And I'm playing the games like, this game is fantastic. It could be a 5-hour game, and I would have felt like I spent my money well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The whole value. I mean, I think we're on the same wavelength here. That this whole value thing, this time for money, is such a weird thing to get hung up on.
Definitely.
I don't know. Well, in that case, speaking of being a kid and playing games, let's get back to the proper script here, which is, I like to find out, where did you get your start with games? Was that something, and you already mentioned your father once in terms of discussing 2K4, but what's the real origin story?
All right, so I've basically been playing games since before I can even remember. My earliest memory of playing any game that I can confirm was the earliest one is probably when I was I had to have been between 2 and 3 years old, and one of my uncles and aunts came over, and they had an N64, and it probably just came out, and they had Super Mario 64. So I ran around the castle for a little bit, and I ran around the castle grounds, and that's all I did. There might have been a memory of watching my dad play a PC game before that, but I don't remember if that was before or after that. My real start with games was Christmas of 1997, when I got a PlayStation 1. And there was a handful of 4 or 5 games that we got that my sister and I would play, but the one that I played first and the one I played most was Crash Bandicoot 2. So that's basically where it all began, and that's where my love for games came from. That's where my borderline obsession with Crash came from. And yeah. So
do you remember what the other games were at all?
Another one was Jet Moto 2. That was also on my favorite game list. Yep. And I mentioned that I consider that the second game I've ever played, because that was the second one I played out of that batch. Tomb Raider was in there, but I didn't really play it. That was kind of my sister did that. I still have it. I've never played it, but I have it with me here. There was, I don't know how many people have heard of this game, but it's called Lucky Luke, and from what I've gathered, it's based off of a French comic book series, and it's basically just about a cowboy. And it's like a side scroller 2D game. That one's actually, it's pretty fun from what I remember of it, but I haven't played it in a few years. And then we had one of those interactive demo discs that has a bunch of demos for games, and that demo disc had a demo for Medieval, it had a demo for Spyro the Dragon, because that hadn't come out yet. So I played that one a lot also, just because it had Spyro on it, so we would just mess around with that before the real game came out. And I don't remember any other game, I think those were what we had. I remember very shortly after getting that for Christmas, my sister's birthday is in March, so for her birthday she got Spyro 1, and then while we were there we found Crash 1, so I got that also. But that's basically where it all began for me.
Now, do you still have your original PS1 and copies of Crash and Crash 2?
I don't have the original PS1, and there's a funny story for this.
I mean, it's a podcast.
This is my ignorance of a 9-year-old kicking in. So I'm half Filipino on my mom's side. So when I was about 9 years old, we went to the Philippines, and the PS2 had already come out.
Mm-hmm.
So we were thinking, okay, well, my mom's family is not the most well off, and we'll give them the PlayStation 1 because we don't need it. On the last day we're there, I being 9 years old and not having the concept of voltages differing between countries, didn't plug the PS1 into the voltage converter and plugged it into the wall. So we were playing the demo disc, and we were playing like Gran Turismo on it. And in the middle of it, the insides of the PS2 just like ignite, or the PS1. So I don't think that thing works anymore. But yeah, so no, I don't have the PS1 anymore. For the games, I still have the original Crash 2. That one never stopped working. My original copies of Crash 1 and Crash 3 both eventually did stop working, so I had to replace those. Which I find weird because Crash 2 is probably the one I play the most.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a question about the physical properties of optical media and what causes them to wear out, right? Because I mean, obviously, if other games are working, it's usually, I think people expect the laser to stop working first. This is probably a whole area you could discourse upon since you do so much PlayStation speedrunning. But it is weird.
I'm actually not super good on like messing with the hardware. Like I know Dill Wingo is like one of my best friends. He messes with a lot of the hardware and stuff, and he's done like modded consoles, and I'm just like, I don't want to touch that.
No, that's fair.
I will buy a PlayStation 2, and if it works, cool.
Hopefully they keep working, right? I mean, that's the other thing now, is I feel like the supply on PlayStation 2s is starting to turn around. Well, maybe that's the next thing then. You know, when you were telling the story about the PlayStation 1, you mentioned that part of the reason you were gonna, hand that off to family was that you'd gotten a PlayStation 2. Was that just another holiday gift, that the first PlayStation 2 in the family?
Yeah, it was like it came out, and by this point, my sister wasn't like fully into games like I was, but she was still young enough to enjoy them, and she stopped eventually, like as she got older, and like now she just plays like very casual games. But like I was very clearly a gamer, and it was I lived and breathed it. So we were just absolutely going to get a PlayStation 2.
Now the same question for that. How has your ancestral PlayStation 2 survived the years?
So that one, the disc drive stopped working eventually at some point. I mean, it was a fat PS2.
Right.
I think it was actually like one of the earliest ones, like the 30,000. Like the oldest PlayStation 2 I know most people having is a 39,000. So I had like even older than that.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that's still like sitting somewhere in like the basement of my mom's house, but the disc drive just doesn't work. So I've replaced it with many PS2s since then.
All right, well, maybe this is, in terms of getting a sense of gaming history, one of the questions I'll ask too is, it's pretty common for someone's first consoles or other gaming stuff to be, holiday gifts, birthday gifts, stuff like that. But at some point, we stick with the hobby. We continue doing it. Do you feel like there's a particular turning point where you took ownership of the hobby? So the sort of thing I'm looking for is, you got your first job and bought a console or a computer or something like that.
Let me see. I don't think it was the PlayStation 4. I think that one was still a gift. That one was, I was in college, so I was starting to reach that point, but I was still on the support of my parents. Sure. So that one still ended up being a gift. So I won't count that one. I think the first one I bought that was with my own money. Actually, this is perfect because it was a retro console. It was either the first or the second Super Smash Con, and I was just like going down the booths, and there was a Nintendo 64, and I didn't own that console when I was younger. So, and it was even like it was a Japan only one that they had modded to be region free. So it's like this nice, beautiful, like clear teal, and I just like I have to have that. So the first console I bought on my own was a Nintendo 64, which fits perfectly with me preferring that generation of games, just the fifth and sixth generation.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I think at this point I have also, like, I don't like collecting stuff, but I think I might have collected all the 5th and 6th gen consoles. which is like a real dirty business when you're trying to get that Saturn.
Yeah, I actually I bought an Xbox for the first time like about half a year ago, and it's the first time I've owned any Xbox. So yeah, so
that's interesting actually, because I feel like, you know, like the original Xbox, maybe if you were into Halo, I don't think anyone, I'm not convinced that anyone actually owns an Xbox One. People tell me sometimes they do. I don't believe it.
My brother-in-law has one, but I think I've seen him play it like twice.
But like the 360, I feel like was everywhere. Like that was.
All of my friends had a 360, and I didn't have a 360. There was no game on it I wanted. Like they're like, oh yeah, I need like Call of Duty Black Ops, I need Halo 3, I need this, I need that, and I'm just like, I'm gonna play Brawl. So I've never felt a need to get an Xbox, but I needed one for speedrunning stuff, which was I got it for Crash Twinsanity.
Right. So, I noted that. I was scrolling through. I do this sometimes where I scroll through someone's speedrun.com profile.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, what platforms are they doing all their runs on? And it's especially useful because you can show obsolete runs. And I was like going through Crash Twinsanity. I was like, okay, PAL PS2, and I was like, NTSC Xbox. I'm like, oh, what happened here?
Yep. There's a very distinct point where it changes.
Well, we'll get there soon enough. But you brought up another thing that I'd like to ask about, which is, this is a speedrun interview podcast, mostly concerned about single player games, but it is nevertheless a big part of gaming to talk about the multiplayer stuff. You just already alluded to Smash Brothers, but broadly, what kind of phases have you had with multiplayer games? This can be, couch co-op, MMOs, League of Legends, whatever. What sort of stuff have you been into?
Well, so I had a very, very brief stint with League of Legends, but it was brief enough that it's almost like not even worth mentioning. Like I never even got to ranked, but like all I'll say about that game is that I love the concept of it, and I think it's really fun, but I cannot do team-based games like that. It's just too frustrating for me. But yeah, the biggest bulk of like my multiplayer experience is definitely Smash Bros. I discovered competitive play for that about a week before Brawl came out, and studied it religiously for about 4 years before I entered a tournament, and then got destroyed. And then just kept entering tournaments for a good few years. I haven't been in a while, partly because of COVID, but I had also been on like a bit of a downturn before that. I wouldn't say I wouldn't go back to it when everything is, back to normal. Like I'd definitely be down to consider it, but it's definitely less of a big part of my life than it was before. But definitely like a huge part of my teenage to like early adult years was defined by Smash Bros. And it was my main hobby before I got into speedrunning.
Now, in terms of games, were you specifically playing Brawl, or did you ever move on to, say, Project M, or I don't know the timeline well enough, so I don't know when 4 comes out, but like, did you play 4 Ultimate much?
I basically played all of them except for 64.
Okay.
I never really competed too much in Melee, just because when I started actually competing, Project M was a thing, and Project M was the first one I did enter a tournament for. I followed a little bit of Brawl. I didn't really start playing it until after it's like quote unquote its death. But I had a very deep respect for Brawl, especially like going back and revisiting it after playing Smash 4. 4 I played for its entire lifetime. And actually, by the end of it, I ended up disliking it. Just the way I didn't like the way its meta evolved, and the default people go to with that is like, oh, well, Bayonetta and Cloud ruined the game. But I think it goes much deeper than that. I think that game just had a very bad patching philosophy on how to make characters better. It was more just give them one option that kills at 40%, and it centralize their entire game around that. And I can name maybe 5 characters who do that besides Bayonetta and Cloud. So I ended up really not liking Smash 4 by the end of it, but it is probably the one I put the most time into. And then I played Ultimate for a few months when it came out, and like it's still the one I compete in when I actually do compete, but I definitely dropped off of that one a lot faster. But by that point I was really into speedrunning, so when I was during Smash 4, I didn't really have another hobby. So even when it frustrated me, I was like, well, what else am I gonna do? Whereas now it's like, well, if Ultimate is making me mad, what can I do? And just like look at my entire library of Crash Bandicoot games that I can speedrun.
What characters did you play in, Brawl 4, etc.?
All right, so I am absolutely a tier whore. If the character is not top tier, I'm not going to consider it. Like that's just a thing with me. Like if I'm going to compete, I want the best chance to win.
Are you familiar with the famous Sanford Kelly clip about pick a top tier?
I might be.
It's just these guys walking down a New York City street, and there's a man yelling, "Pick a top tier! Pick a top tier."
Okay, no, I haven't seen that one, right. But that sounds great.
No, that's exactly.
Yeah, so like, in every Smash game, I end up playing either like one of the best characters, if not the best character. Like in Melee, for the longest time, my main was Marth, who is generally considered top 3 at like worst, and some people would go as far as to say he's potentially the best character. More recently in Melee, like as my gameplay in Smash evolved, I started to gravitate more towards characters who are like, because Marth is a bit like of a distance fighter where you play very slow, very patient, and I can do that, but I thrive off of being able to shift it up and be very aggressive when I need to, and being very in my opponent's face. So my gameplay shifted to Fox, who is the best character in the game. So for Melee, I would say my main is definitely Fox. For Brawl, again, for the longest time, it was Marth, and then as my gameplay evolved, I eventually changed to Meta Knight, as it did for probably 90% of the people who play Brawl. For 4 was that was a very weird time, because I could never stick to a character in 4, because the first character I tried to play in 4 was Greninja, and he was really good on 3DS, and then they nerfed him very hard to the point that he dropped tiers going from 3DS to Wii U. And like I wanted to stick with him. I wanted to be a character loyalist. I was like, I love Greninja. I need to stick it out. And then eventually I was like, I can't do it because I feel like I'm being held back by the character. And another character I had played on 3DS that my friend had recommended to me was Diddy Kong, who very infamously was a huge problem at the beginning of Smash 4.
Right.
So he ended up getting hard nerfed, and I still tried to work with it because Diddy was still like a really good character, but I kept trying to play him as he originally was, and eventually couldn't. So then I just bounced around so many characters for most of that game's life. I went to Sheik, I went to Meta Knight, I went to Cloud, I went to Corrin, I went to Lucina. And then like I eventually, at the very end, in the last year of the game, I went back to Diddy Kong and loved him. So he's the character I consider my true main in Smash 4. Is like, if I were to ever enter into a tournament for that game again, I would absolutely play as Diddy Kong. And then I played like a little bit of Bayonetta, but that was more just like might as well. And like I was like, it was like if I was very clearly being outplayed, it's like why not just steal a game with the stupidest character in the game. But yeah, no, for 4 it was absolutely Diddy Kong. And then Ultimate, like I've kind of gone through something similar like that, not to the same degree, but the first character I played in Ultimate was Inkling, and she's still probably my favorite character in that game. I switched to Greninja for a little bit because early on in Ultimate that character was getting a lot of hype, and then like the more I played him, the more I realized like yeah, he's definitely a lot better, but there's still issues with him that I couldn't get over. And then I went to Zero Suit Samus for a while, and I really like her as well. But she's a character who's so weird in how she plays that you have to be constantly playing the game. And you have to constantly be playing her, I feel, to play her well. So when I took a break for a few months and came back, I was like, if I play Zero Suit Samus, it's not going to work. So I went back to Inkling. So right now, like I guess like with Ultimate, I kind of like jump between both of them.
No, that makes sense. That follows. Like all those characters are like we're either top tiers or in the top tier discussion.
Yeah,
and so that definitely. I had friends who were more into those games, and I played them a little myself, but I mostly lived in the retirement home, so I would play like Villager and Richter and stuff like that. So
one of my friends who's like in like a crew that we have that's more just like a bunch of we're really just more a bunch of friends hanging out these days. But he's like one of the best villager. It's probably the best villager in like MDVA.
Cool.
So
awesome. Are you? I mean, you don't have to say. Are you located in MDVA area or?
Yeah, I am.
Okay,
I live in Maryland.
So do you isn't one of the big Smash places in that area Xanadu? Question mark.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That was my local when
cool.
I competed.
It is such a valuable resource to have a good
it
local.
is, especially when they went to the new venue, and that venue is big enough that they host major tournaments there.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the times I'm able to just go to tournaments by virtue of driving to them.
Yeah, no, that's really important. For anyone watching, I posted the link to the video I was talking about in chat, which is Sanford Kelly, a famous Street Fighter player, walking down the street yelling "Pick a top tier." Which is sound advice for life.
Absolutely, pick a top tier. Like if you're looking to win, then there's no reason not to. Like if you're looking to have fun and just play whoever you want, yeah, go for it. Like I know people who just destroy people with Kirby, but if your goal is to be one of the best, like pick a top tier. Like it's nothing but a handicap if you don't, in my opinion.
All right, well, this is a speedrunner interview podcast, so it's about the time that I ask the important question. How did you first learn about speedrunning?
First learning about speedrunning, I think, would be this had to be, I was 12 years old or something, and this was, YouTube had just become a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a video called like Super Mario 64 Ninja Style, like 16 stars in like, I don't even remember how many minutes. I don't know if it was a task or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was, because the actual speedrun I think was still at 70 stars at that point. But I just watched it. I didn't understand that it was a speedrun. I just thought it was just like, oh, this guy's playing the game like in this really cool way. So that was probably my first experience with speedruns. But the thing that got me into speedruns, which I guess might be more what you're looking for, is so again, the first game I'd ever played was Crash Bandicoot 2, and I had this thing where it wasn't really a tradition. It was more just like every year I would play through the game, just because like I'd play through it, I'd beat it at 100%, and then about a year later I'd be like, you know what, I want to play Crash 2 again. So it just happened every year. And eventually I reached the point where you know it'd take me like maybe 1 or 2 days to beat it. And then I realized there was the 1 year I did it, and it took me maybe 5 hours. Like I was just like, wow, that didn't even take an entire day. So I sat there and I realized I am reaching a limit of what I can do with this game just playing through it. I wonder if there's anything I could do to make it more interesting. So I just sat there and I was like, I wonder if there's Crash Bandicoot 2 speedruns. So I went to YouTube and I looked up Crash Bandicoot 2 speedrun, and I found the video that was recorded at the time, which was 1 hour 29 minutes by Mr. Bean 35,000 VR. And I watched the full hour and a half of that run, and at the end of it, I said, wow, I'm terrible. And I was just like, I have never seen anybody play the game like that. So like it sat in the back of my mind for about a year. Like I didn't even just think much about it. I was just like, and then like the next year I decided to find the video again, and I found that he had a new record of 1 hour and 20 minutes. And that one just blew my mind, and I was like, I need to try this. So like, I downloaded an emulator and like got everything set up and did a 100% speed run. Not like with a live split or anything. I just like timed it on my phone. Yeah. And I think I ended up doing like 2.5 hours. I 100% of the game. And then that was basically just the beginning. And then like a few weeks later, I made a speedrun.com account. And I submitted my first run, which was an any percent no game or Rubius run. And like at that time, I was really just recording them. I wasn't streaming or anything. Yeah. But that was basically the beginning, is watching somebody else play Crash 2 at a level I had never seen before and deciding I need to do that.
So there's a good question, though, which is, you started out, you just loved playing this particular game over and over again. You discovered that there were some runs online. I can infer that this was around the time that speedrun.com did exist, since you had made a profile and submitted the game. What prompted you then to start streaming it as opposed to just recording and submitting? Okay, so when I started like doing runs and submitting them, it was still very much a side thing I did when I had the free time, because
I was in my junior and senior year of college, so free time was fleeting.
Sure.
And I was still trying to like be really good at Smash, which was an effort that was painful. But so like the speedrunning was, I would just go and do it like every once in a while, but it wasn't something I was grinding constantly. When I graduated, which was May of 2016, I ended up back at home, which is 2 hours away from where I went to college, because I went to college near the Baltimore area, but I grew up in Southern Maryland, which is basically the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I was cut off from all of my friends. There was a lot of just like stress going on in my life because my dad was very sick at this time.
Mm-hmm.
As I found out like a month later, he had cancer and he passed away. But like, so I was not at a good spot, and I needed something to do. So I started picking up speedrunning again, where I was just like, well, I can do this when I come home from work. It doesn't require seeing anybody, so like it's not a problem that I don't have my friends. And like it's something I can improve at. So I started doing more offline runs, and I started getting better and better. And then I thought to myself, people stream this. I wonder if that would be really fun, and it would make it easier to submit because I wouldn't even have to bother like uploading it to YouTube. I would just highlight it on Twitch. So at about like mid-June of that year, I started streaming it. Had the couple hiccups of like I didn't tell it to save the previous broadcast and all that. So I did that for about a week or two, and then that's when my dad passed away. So I just like vanished for like half a year after that, and just like, so I streamed a little bit and then just didn't do anything until about November of the same year, where again, like I was still very much in the grieving process. And this was about like that summer they had announced the Insane trilogy, and someone on the Crash subreddit had come up with the idea of playing through every game in the series once per week in the lead up to the Insane trilogy, just to like retrospect on them and like how were they.
Yeah.
And I decided to myself, you know what, why don't I stream that entire process and just play the games casually? And the Crash 1 stream went about like, it was just a casual playthrough that took a while because Crash 1 is hard. But Crash 2, I went through it so quickly because I've 100%ed it and speedrun it. So after I got through it casually, I was just like, I'll just start speedrunning it again. And then from that point, I just started streaming regularly. So about November 2016, I just started streaming constantly.
Cool.
And that's also where when my focus shifted from Smash to speedrunning.
At that point, yeah, you're like, well, let me dive into this too. And certainly, I feel like, do you feel that? So, I feel like if I say to someone, "Hey, I'm interviewing a Crash speedrunner," my impression as someone in my early 30s is that people are going to be mostly talking about the classic Crash, the Crash 1 through 3. But I feel like at this point, between Insane Trilogy and Crash 4, feels like the series is kind of back in a way. Do you feel like the critical and commercial success of Insane Trilogy and 4 have like helped keep you going and focused on Crash as opposed to doing more Smash stuff?
I don't think so, because when I started the speedruns and stuff, Crash was dead. Like the last time we had seen a Crash game on a not mobile phone was Mind Over Mutant in 2008. So I wasn't speedrunning Crash because like, oh, he was back in the limelight. He was very much like, by that point I was convinced that Crash was never coming back. Like I was like, they've given up. Activision doesn't want anything to do with this franchise. We're never getting another Crash game. And part of me was kind of okay with that because of the way Crash was going by the end of that era anyway. So I was playing Crash 2 because I genuinely just love that game. And like, even if the remakes hadn't happened, I probably would still be running Crash. So.
All right, let's get some individual game takes here. Now, we already established that Crash 2 was your first proper speedrun. Of all of the speedruns that you have done, what is your favorite?
Crash Twinsanity, 100%, absolutely. I like to jokingly, I said this a few days ago on stream, I joke that Crash Twinsanity 100% is an example of video games as an art form. because it's just so wild with how broken that game is. Like when you hear 100%, you expect like, okay, it doesn't matter how broken the game is, you still have to do a lot of things. So like it's gonna be a pretty run of the mill game, and then you watch 100% in that game, and you're just thinking, what the hell is going on? Like I even remember there was a GDQ hotfix. I wasn't like running the game because I had just started running it, so my time was terrible. But it was Joester98, who's the record holder for 100%, was playing it on. I think the topic for that night was games that were on the backup list for GDQ, but didn't end up in the show because Twins was a backup that year. And I remember just sitting in there watching the stream and watching the Twitch chat, and about half of the Twitch chat was your standard trolls being like, "Oh, Crash, Resident Sleeper,"
right?
And then like another like 30% were people being like, "I've never heard of this Crash game," because a lot of people only heard about the first 3. And then like the last 20% was just people going, "What is going on?" It's like I can't even describe how insane that run is, because it's just, you're doing something crazy constantly. It is constantly going out of bounds, constantly like skipping cutscenes, skipping triggers, like cutting out huge portions of the level, and like it's the most wild run I've ever done, and it's absolutely the most fun I've had with any speed game. Which, like, it's not the only reason that Crash Twinsanity is my favorite Crash game, but it is definitely a contributing factor to it.
No, sure. Sometimes this is weird to say, but when games break in satisfying ways, it actually really does improve your love of them. I think that's the case.
Absolutely. Like every time, like when people are like, "Oh yeah, it's so unfortunate how broken Crash Twinsanity is," I'm like, unfortunate? The game's brokenness is the reason it still has a fan base 16 years after it came out. Like it's definitely, it's the single most divisive Crash game in the franchise, because like most Crash games like have a universal opinion of what people think on them. Crash Twinsanity is very much, half the fan base loves the game and half the fan base hates everything about it. And I've definitely met both sides. Like, so it never bothers me when people like say they don't like Twinsanity, because like that's fine, you're allowed to have an opinion. It only really bothers me when like someone says they don't like it and then they try to like force their opinion down you, or like they're aggressive about it. I had one guy I had to deal with where like the few times I had seen him in my chat, like he would eventually direct the conversation to criticizing Twinsanity, because I would constantly talk about it because I love the game. And then one time I was doing Twinsanity and he came in and just immediately started trash talking, and I was like, "Do you ever do anything besides like talk about all the like minor nitpicks you have for like hating this game?" And it was just like, I didn't have a problem that he didn't like the game. I had a problem that he was looking for a reason to hate it, and was trying to convince me that the game was horrible. Like,
yeah, that's a weird part of internet discourse, when someone like stakes their identity on loving or hating something. And if you don't agree with it, well, you must be attacking them personally, and this is a fight now.
Like I was just like, I'm not gonna have this conversation, because it's just it just boils down to you just being like, just hating Twinsanity and just praising every other game in the franchise that's not Twinsanity. He was like, "Well, you're just a Twinsanity fanboy," and I was like,
It's true. All I have to do is delegitimize your enjoyment of Twinsanity, and then I am correct. That's how this works.
Yeah, like I'll give actual reasons to why I love Twinsanity, even though it's a broken mess. I think the level design is fantastic. It has the single most unique soundtrack of any game I've ever played. Like, even though it's really broken, it's just an insanely fun game, and it is one of the most quotable games I've ever played. Like, the dialogue is just hilarious. Mm-hmm. So like even if like in terms of raw gameplay, like all of the original trilogy probably trounces it, at least like Crash 2 does, like every other like little thing about it just adds up to make an amazing thing. Which I guess, going back to when you asked me with like the favorite games thing, how do I judge what games I like? The reason I can't really say like what I'm looking for is because it kind of differs for every game, and it's not one thing with every game. Like, with, again, going back to Kingdom Hearts 1, the reason I like it, I would never in any good conscience say that Kingdom Hearts 1 has better combat than Kingdom Hearts 2, because it doesn't. Mm-hmm. Kingdom Hearts 2's combat is just like far and away the best out of like the entire series. But Kingdom Hearts 1 has so many other small things. You know, it's more open world. It feels like it encourages you to explore more, whereas Kingdom Hearts 2 is more tunnel-like. The story is like a lot more engaging, I feel, and a lot more connected. And it's just like a bunch of like really small details like that. They just ultimately lead me to preferring Kingdom Hearts 1, even though Kingdom Hearts 2's combat is better. So like that's how I judge games when I think about them, is just like I look at the whole thing. I don't look at any one specific thing that is or isn't good about it. I just like, so is the entire game wrapped into like a whole package? Does it work? And that's how I feel about like Kingdom Hearts, and that's how I feel about Crash Twinsanity. It's like, yeah, like if you want to sing, oh, the Crash Twinsanity is a broken mess that's really short and kind of all over the place, you're right. But it's also a really fun platformer that like has some of the most interesting level design of any Crash game, because it takes advantage of the fact that it's a 3D game. So like some of the level design in that game is wonderful. It's and then like it's an extremely memorable game because of all the dialogue and the soundtracks and stuff. And then when I take all of those factors and put it together, that's when I realize that it's the Crash game I have the most fun with, regardless of whether or not I'm speedrunning it. So of course it's my favorite one, even if that's not the common opinion.
No, that follows. I mean, you made the pitch for it, but that does mean I do have to ask you the flip question, which is, of all of the speedruns that you've done, what was your least favorite?
Let's see. I don't know if I want to count this, because I never did like serious speedruns attempts of it. It was always just like random one-off races, but this is something I'm pretty... Like, anybody who knows me knows how much I dislike this game. I really don't like Crash Bash.
Oh, okay.
Like, and I feel like in recent times, more people have like started to flip to that side where like, oh yeah, Crash Bash is not a good game. But you have the people who are like, oh, Crash Bash is wonderful. It's an amazing game. I want them to remake it. Like, Crash Bash, in my opinion, is a terrible game. I think it is absolutely one of the worst Crash games. And it's one of the only Crash games that I would consider to be truly bad. Like, I have so many issues with the game. Like, I'm not going to say like it's like there's no redeeming qualities about it, because like it's definitely fun when you have 4 people for, you know, like at least like a 30-minute to an hour session. Like you can enjoy that game, but like the AI is so ridiculous in how much they cheat. Like it's such an obscenely frustrating game. It's repetitive. It feels like luck whether or not like the AI actually like slips up at any point. Like I've got so many issues with that game that like every time I play that game, my opinion of it lowers, which I consider impressive because I already have a low opinion of it.
See, it's interesting to me that we're discussing because for folks who may not remember, I'm going to assume most people do, but of course Crash Bash is the party game, you know, is it in the style of like a Mario Party? I don't think I've ever actually played it myself.
No, it's actually the only thing it has in common with Mario Party is that it is a party game.
Okay, all right. Well,
it's honestly closer to like a 3D like battle royale or some shit.
Okay.
Like, and it's like for those who want like a bigger pinpoint on when it came out, it was the last Crash game on the PS1. And it was also the first one not made by Naughty Dog.
Right, because the first 3 in CTR are all...
We're all Naughty Dog.
All Naughty Dog, yeah.
Yeah. In terms of, I will say, like, again, like, I really don't like that game, but, again, I've never grinded it, so it doesn't really feel like a correct answer. In terms of, like, runs I have actually grinded and taken seriously, at this point, the one I probably like the least is one of the versions of the Insane trilogy, and that one's more of a factor of like just preferring the originals, with the exception of I actually prefer the remake of Crash 3, which in and of itself is a hot take. But like with Crash 1 and Crash 2, I never really put a lot of time into Crash 1 on the Insane trilogy, so I guess I won't count that either. But like Crash 2 Insane trilogy, I grinded that for like the entire first year, and like you wouldn't know it by looking at the leaderboards now, but during the PS4 era of that game, I basically dominated every category of that game. I had maybe like 1 or 2 people competing with me at like any given point. So I put a lot of time into that game, and I did really like it for a while, and I still respect it for a speed run. Like if you go watch like the 2 top runners of that game now, Potty and Groovy, like they're absolutely fantastic runners, and the run is incredible. So I'll never say it's a bad run, but like it's just like because I have that background with the original Crash 2, and I love the original Crash 2. Like the differences in the Insane trilogy just frustrate me too much for me to genuinely enjoy it.
No, that's fair. I mean, and it's good answers too, because I feel like this happens sometimes. You react so violently to trying to speedrun something.
Oh, yeah.
You ask, did I really run that, or did I just immediately hit the eject button? So it was fair to give two answers there. How about this? This one is a game that you would like to speedrun, but you haven't gotten around to it. Whether for time reasons or because it doesn't fit in with what you're doing right now.
Oh, there's so many answers to this one. I basically have like a backlog in my head of games I would like to try to run. The most notable one would probably be Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. Because it, like, just watching people run that, it very much reminds me of Crash Twinsanity, where it's a linear platformer. It's a very Crash style game, but it's also broken beyond all belief. So that's one that's definitely like been on my radar. I did attempt to learn Jak and Daxter about a year ago, but stopped because of like real life stuff. Mm-hmm. It was I was between jobs when I was practicing it, and then I got about 66% through the 100% run, and then I got a job offer. So I ended up just stopping, and I never went back to it. But it's one I would be willing to try again. That or like any of the games in the Jak trilogy. Years ago, I actually learned Spyro the Dragon. And I did 2 runs of it, and that's one that for years I've been just saying over and over, like, I need to go back to it. So like, there's also like a handful of games where I've done a couple runs in the past, but never like really seriously did, but liked them enough that I'd like to grind them. Like aside from Spyro the Dragon, another example of that would be A Hat in Time. I've done maybe like 5 runs of that game, and like never really put any serious effort into it, but like it's such a cool speed run, and it's also again like it's my second favorite game of all time. So I would just love to go back to it and like run it properly.
No, those are all good answers, and sometimes it is like that, right? I mean, speedrunning can, especially if you want to do well in a competitive game, that's a major time commitment.
Definitely.
All right, one more take question then, which is a favorite speedrun to watch that you don't run yourself and you don't plan to run yourself.
Kingdom Hearts 2. Like Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, I do really love watching both of them. And if I were to speedrun one of them, I would probably pick Kingdom Hearts 2. But I just, despite how much I love the games, I just have no genuine interest in like learning the runs of them, just because I just really like them as casual games. And I'm sure if I tried to speedrun them, I could still separate between playing it casually and speedrunning it. But the most interest I have with speedrunning like any of the KH games is either taking some of the strats from the speedrun and implementing them into a casual playthrough. Like Kingdom Hearts 1 speedruns are the reason I started spamming magic in that game. And then like I've done a couple like Kingdom Hearts 2 rando playthroughs before, but again, there was kind of more just like a sit back and relax and just have fun with it kind of thing, and just experience the game in a new way. So more than like actually trying to go fast.
I was just about to bring that up. I didn't even know there were randomizers for that until I had J-Hobbs on a few weeks ago, who was like, have you heard about the good news?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you've never seen a Kingdom Hearts 2 randomizer, absolutely go watch it. It is one of the coolest things ever. Like, and even playing it as somebody who has, again, I have no like genuine interest in learning KH2 as a speedrun. I have very, very limited knowledge of KH2 as a run. Rando is still just so fun to do. And like I need to do that again at some point.
So we've been talking about a lot of gaming, a lot of grinding runs. A thing I like to check in on is, do you have any particular thoughts or approaches to maintaining good health, especially as it relates to specifically hands, wrists, things with sitting, sedentary stuff? Do you do anything like that?
I'm still trying to figure it out. Like I am definitely not as active as I should be. I've been saying for the past 2 years that I need to start working out and still haven't done it. And hand pains is actually something I've started to deal with recently, partly because the original Crash games in particular are very strenuous on the hands. Like Crash 2, actually, I've reached the point where I cannot play that game on a DualShock 2 because the controller just is not comfortable for me. If I play on an original DualShock 2 or a DualShock 1, or any of like the classic PlayStation controllers, I will get about an hour in before I cannot play it anymore. So I bought an adapter that lets me use a DualShock 4 on a PS2 solely so I wouldn't have that issue. And then I've also bought compression gloves. So on the more like when I'm playing a more strenuous game like Crash 2, if it starts to hurt my hands, I'll start wearing them. But yeah, that's something I'm still figuring out on how to approach properly. But it is something I've had to start dealing with just because of just how strenuous that game is. And I don't even, with Crash 2, I don't even do what's considered the optimal movement, which is zigzagging your neutral slide spins. So for those who don't know, in all three of the original Crash games, it is faster to alternate diagonals when you're in the air or sliding than it is to just hold straight. So at the very top level of Crash 2, you do like you slide and you hit like left right like 1 or 2 times, and then you let go and you hit square, and this all happens in the span of like half a second. So it's a really rapid amount of inputs in any given time, and I don't do it. It does matter. Like I lose probably up to like 2 minutes for not doing it. But the reason I don't is because this game is painful to me when I don't do it. So imagine when I do, and like it's just not worth my hands to like go that fast. So I just accept that I'm going to be slower than the top players just because of that.
You know, on that note, it might be a good time to be a little more lighthearted and do some controller hot takes, because certainly at this point you've done a bunch of runs on different platforms. I assume you use the pad of your choice when you do, for example, PC runs with Insane Trilogy. Do you have favorite and least favorite controllers?
Favorite is probably... I don't know if I want to say it just because it's such a recent controller, but the DualSense for the PlayStation 5.
No, you're not the first person to say it on this podcast.
The DualSense is really nice, but like discounting that because it just came out, the DualShock 4 is probably my favorite. I also really like the Switch Pro controller, but there isn't any game that I use it for.
Okay.
Least favorite is hard.
Is it the Duke?
No, actually, I love the Duke. I have it right here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera.
That's it.
I use this to speedrun Twinsanity.
Oh, you really do? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because when I got the Xbox, it came with like 3 controllers, and they were all like the Xbox Elite S. And I don't know if it's Twinsanity or I don't know if it's the quality of the controllers, but all of those controllers have dead zones when I play Twinsanity.
Okay.
And I have bought replacement Elite X, like Xbox S's. Like I even have one here that I bought like the week before I got sick. And it even replaces the sticks with DualShock sticks. So I was like, this will be great. And then I was playing Twinsanity and it dead zoned. But like when I use the Duke, I never have the problem. And if I do, it goes away like very quickly. So I bought the Duke as like a novelty thing. I was like, oh, it would be really funny. I have this gigantic controller that everybody hates. And then I played on it and I was like, this is my best controller.
So are you did you get the because wasn't there a re-release of the Duke for like just USB usage?
I think there was one.
Okay.
It was either for like Xbox One or for like USB. I don't have that one because I don't play the Duke out of choice, but like I don't hate the controller.
Okay.
It's definitely not a great controller, but it's the one I have. It's because it's the only one that works. I actually bought a second one in case that one dies. So there's a second one on my desk sitting in a little like Ziploc bag.
You know, I don't blame you at all for this because I had the experience of trying to get up and running speedrunning with Mech Assault, which of course is an Xbox exclusive game, and I didn't want to spend a lot of money on it, so I was like trying to buy third party, Xbox S shaped controllers, and they've all been trash so far.
I don't know what it is with them. They're just not. Like the sticks just aren't good on like the smaller Xbox controller. Something about the Duke just the sticks work.
I have a lot of nostalgia.
I know like Twinsanity also like is particularly a game that has calibration issues. Runners have had that issue. But like it's especially bad on those Xbox controllers. I don't know. I never had that problem when I ran the game on PS2, and I very rarely have the problem when I use the Duke.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I had a lot of nostalgia for Halo and Halo 2 with X controllers, so I don't know, if those games just handled the inputs real well, or it mattered to have working controllers in the early 2000s. But but interesting. I mean, hey, there you go.
Yeah, I don't really think I have a least favorite controller. Like, I mean, I could bring up how like the N64 controller, but even that one, I don't really think the N64 controller is a bad idea so much as that it was a controller that was very ambitious and had a lot of ideas that it didn't live up to. I guess in retrospect, I don't particularly care for the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, but that's just because they're so awkward. Like, again, I don't think they're bad. They're just so different. And then like I physically can't use like older PlayStation controllers, so I guess I will say the one controller I don't like is the DualShock 3 for the PS3. I think it's very fragilely made.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
I have become a dark horse lover of the DualShock 3 because of speedrunning PS1 games on PS TV.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
I ran Crash 2 on the PS TV before I got a PAL PS2.
Okay.
And I actually used the DualShock 4 for that.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even know the DualShock 4 because I was someone who was fortunate enough to buy PS TVs when they were dirt cheap, and I got like $80 for a DS3, a DualShock 3, and a PS TV. So I was like, well, I guess this is the controller you use with this. I never even thought to check.
Yeah, so like that was definitely transitioning to the PS2 from the PS TV. The hardest thing for me was getting used to a DualShock 2 again, and then in the long run, it didn't even matter because now I use the DualShock 4 on the PS2.
Oh, you have like a converter?
Yeah, this little like Bluetooth dongle right here. It actually has like basically no delay. It's really impressive.
Cool. No, that's I'm seeing that more and more with the converters for like Bluetooth wireless for older consoles, of that era too, like Saturn, Dreamcast, whatever. And glad that they work, right? Because that would be my first concern with wireless would be some sort of substantial delay.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's keep moving. Let's get towards some of the games. Oh, here's a broad question for you, which you may or may not have an answer for. But when it comes to speedrunning, when it comes to picking up a game to spend your time speedrunning, do you feel like you have a particular a mission statement or role? Meaning that do you like when you go to a game, I'm going to make sure that this happens, or I'm going to grind for the top times, or I'm going to focus on routing and discovery. Do you feel like there's any particular approach that you take, in order to feel like, yeah, I put in my 2 cents with this game?
Not really. I kind of just, with most games, I just want to play it. The games where I did actually try to grind for a top time would be the Insane Trilogy and Crash 4. And that was more just feeling like, okay, well, these are new Crash games and somebody needs to lead them. And so that was kind of where I was with both of those. It was just like, the whole like Thanos, fine, I'll do it myself. But even though like those are 2 games where in the past, and in the case of Crash 4 in the very recent past, I was like a world record tier runner for those games. It's never really been something I've chased, and I've every time I have started like grinding for record, I've realized that that's the point where I stop enjoying the game. So like there's nothing wrong with grinding for a record. Like if you want to go for it, absolutely go for it. There's nothing wrong with it. But for me, I just enjoy playing the game, and I enjoy playing for myself. So like if that ends up being record, then cool. If not, then as long as I get a time I'm happy with, it doesn't really matter to me whether or not it's 2nd place or 200th place.
Cool. No, I mean that's honestly, I think that is kind of the most pure level to do it on, which is like you want to play the game, and how can you keep doing that? Chances are, speedrunning can provide that structure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's start talking about some specific games. Now, usually, as part of my preparation for an interview, I ask for a few VODs. In this case, what I really like, and I don't know if you did this intentionally, but you gave me kind of three particular VODs. One from sort of what I would think of as like each period of history. You gave me Crash 2 100%, Crash Twinsanity 100%, and then Crash 4 any percent. And so let's talk about Twinsanity first, because I think Twinsanity is the one you've talked about maybe the most so far. As your answer for favorite. Was this a game that you had played back when it came out, or something you only came to more recently in the past few years for running?
Yeah, I played it when it came out. The only, like, every Crash game I played when it came out, with the exception of Tag Team Racing and Crash Boom Bang, which, in my opinion, those are two games that you can completely skip. But no, so like when I say like I'm a diehard Crash fan, I mean it. I stuck with that series until it died. It didn't matter what direction it went. It didn't matter what the quality of the games were. If a Crash game came out, I played it. So Crash Twinsanity, I remember the first time I played it was, I think, Halloween of the year it came out, because I had rented it from a Blockbuster, which is a good litmus test for how old I am.
Great moment in time. You know how old this is now.
Yeah. And, you know, playing it, I was like, you know, this, for one, Crash Twinsanity is hard. Like, the first hub of that game is actually really brutal. And, you know, I was like, this is hard, this is weird, it's a very different Crash game, but I remember liking it the entire time. Like, never had an issue, like, with how it played or how it was different. I never even noticed it was a unfinished, quote unquote, or like broken game. Like, people will constantly bring that up, but when I think about my first playthrough of Crash Twinsanity, I would not have known how broken that game was if I hadn't looked it up online. So like, I never understand why people hold that against the game, because it's not something you would know by just playing it, at least for me.
Right. It's not just like you walk into a corner and you just slip out of bounds. You know, you need to know what you're doing.
It's not Sonic 06, basically. Like, Sonic 06, you can watch it and see just how much of a mess that game is. Crash Twinsanity, like, you have to be trying to break that game, I feel. Like, there might be like a couple like one-off bugs you'll run into, but like the stuff you see in a Crash Twinsanity 100% speedrun, you would never have that happen playing it casually. Like, everything that happens in that run, like, is like mostly intentional.
Now, when I was watching the VOD, and this was, I think, a PB VOD that you had gotten right before you know, you were ill.
Yeah.
And I was listening to it, and sometimes, you know, when I get PB VODs that I'm watching for a runner, I get like doubt about whether or not this is actually the game soundtrack, or if it's just music that the runner is listening to while running, because, you know, they've played the game a million bajillion times. And then eventually I figured out, just by paying attention, that like, okay, yeah, the music stops, you know, with levels, et cetera, so it must be the game's music. And then I went to the Wikipedia page, and I was like, there's got to be a whole paragraph about this. And there's a whole paragraph about the critical reception to the music of this game.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the music in this game?
I love it. It's amazing.
Now, are you generally a fan of acapella type stuff, or is it really just like you have specific memories for this soundtrack?
I don't know if I'd say I'm specifically a fan of acapella. I'm also like, I'm the kind of person who I'll listen to anything, really. Like, if you look at my playlist on my iPhone, it ranges anywhere from like video game music to like 2012's Billboard Hot 100 to like the classic rock to rap. So like, I'll listen to anything as long as it's good. But like, I do like especially love the Crash Twinsanity soundtrack, just because it is the single most unique soundtrack I've heard in any game ever. Just being 100% acapella. Like, I know they synthesize it a little bit,
sure.
but like, there's not a single musical instrument in that soundtrack. And like, it's just so catchy. It's so fun to listen to. I even remember when I was watching Twinsanity runs, but not really. I wasn't running it yet. And I would watch Joester do runs, and I would always be like, oh man, I love the Insanity Island music that plays like in the first hub. And everybody would always be like, oh yeah, you like it now, but just wait till you start running it. You'll get so sick of this song. I'm like over a year into running this game, and the beginning of 100% is very reset heavy because of a trick at the end of the first level. I am not sick of that song yet. Like, I'm waiting for the moment where I get tired of it, because like I just love the soundtrack so much.
Let's talk about versions, because I know from interviewing, I had Dilwingo on the podcast previously, and we had some opportunity to talk about the PAL versions of Crash games because of the adjustments made to accommodate for the frame rate. These versions I think sometimes end up being faster. And my guess was this is why when I looked at your leaderboard history, you started out with PAL PS2, but then since then you've switched to NTSC Xbox. What's the history there in terms of what version you're running of the game?
Okay, so I feel like I don't fully have a grasp on all of the details about the version differences on Twins. I do know for the most part they're very minor, and most versions of the game are competitive. So if I say anything that's wrong, I apologize in advance to anybody who likes Twinsanity. It was like, oh, he's spreading misinformation. But this is also I've talked about this in depth a lot with Atomical Sloths, who's also a Twins runner. And he is he's also an NTSC Xbox runner, and he knows more about that version than anybody on the planet. So the PAL PS2 version of Twinsanity is the most popular version, and for a while I think it was considered the best version of the game because Twinsanity has this thing called the slide glitch, where if the game is running at 60 hertz. So every NTSC version and the PAL Xbox version, if you're not I think PAL Xbox you can switch between whether or not you're playing 50 hertz or 60 hertz. So if you're playing the game at 60 hertz, the direction that your slide goes can just suddenly change depending on a number of factors. I don't think it's strictly random, but it has to do with how you move the controller, how the camera itself moves and stuff like that. And it doesn't happen on 50 hertz, which means it doesn't happen on PAL PS2. So on PAL PS2, you can guarantee straight lines all the time when you do a slide jump in that game. And the slide jump in Twinsanity is a huge commitment because it's not like the standard Crash slide jump. It's a Super Mario 64 slide jump.
Okay. Yeah.
Where you slide and you launch forward and you go in that direction until you land. So because of that, most runners run on the PAL PS2 version because they don't want to deal with the slide glitch, and because that was what I was told when learning the game, that's what I picked up first. I already had the PS2 for Crash 2 anyway, so I just bought the PAL version of Twinsanity. And then as I was learning it and playing it, I was told that the Xbox version is the faster version of the game because it loads faster, which you don't really see a lot of loads in Twinsanity because they all happen in the background. But if you notice during the run, I'll just pause at certain points. That's so the game can load.
Oh, I was going to ask that exactly. I was going to ask exactly that question. I was like, what are these pauses? Am I missing something?
Yeah, the game loads faster when it's paused. Okay. And on PS2, you usually have to wait, 2 to 3 seconds. Sometimes you have to wait 5 seconds. For most of the loads on Xbox, when you pause, it's instant. So you just pause and immediately unpause again. So that was the big thing. So there's minor time save on the Xbox version just because of loads. And then there's also a lot of what are called the Xbox ledges, where a lot of the out of bounds tricks you can do. There's more pixels to land on the Xbox version, so they become easier. One of the best examples is that there's a skip at the beginning of the game, which it's called tree skip, I think, where it actually skips 2 cutscenes in the tutorial. Where you jump on the top of Crash's house and then you jump onto a tree and then from there you just clip out of bounds. That trick is really annoying on PS2, but it's super easy on Xbox. As an example of how some of the Xbox ledges are they just make the game a lot more convenient. So that's part of it. So you can be more consistent on the Xbox version because of that. So then I asked, I was so why doesn't everybody run on the Xbox? And the answer was basically, well, nobody has one. Everybody just has the game on PS2. So then I started, I would talk to Sloss about it, and he was like, yeah, I think the NTSC Xbox version is the fastest. Because even though the NTSC Xbox version has to deal with the slide glitch, there's no way around that. For one, he doesn't even think it's bad, and I've started to agree with him. There's some points where I actually really appreciate the slide glitch because it lets me do these weird curves when I'm doing a slide jump. And there's only one point where I consider it truly inconvenient, which is at the end of the first level in the second hub, Ice Climb. But there's also a handful of NTSC only glitches. In the final level, Ant Agony, there's a glitch called the ball glitch. Well, no, that's a different glitch. But there's so many different glitches in this game, so I just lose track of them. But there's a glitch at the beginning of that level where in the NTSC version, there's like an enemy at the very beginning of the level who like picks up these bombs and throws them at you. And if you move one of the bombs out of its like pedestal, when he tries to go and pick it up, the bomb will freeze in place wherever it is. So what you do is you move it out of the pedestal and then you slide into it, which pops it into the air, and then it freezes in place, and you use it as a platform to get to a gem about like 5 seconds earlier. So like that's an NTSC only thing. So it's just like, ultimately at the end of the day, most versions of Twinsanity are viable for runs. The only one that's not is version 1 of the PS2 can't do the zombie glitch, which is very important for 100%. But otherwise, like any of them work. It's just that Xbox was the big thing I wanted. I wanted that over PS2, but I didn't want to get a PAL Xbox because getting a NTSC one was already enough of a pain. And it was just like, okay, so like ultimately at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether you play on NTSC or PAL. And like based on like minor technicalities, you could argue that the NTSC version is optimal anyway. But ultimately doesn't matter too much. But that's where I transitioned from PAL PS2 to Xbox, was mostly just getting it for Xbox.
No, that makes sense. Because I know the some of the 6th generation Crash games have sort of a tortured existence when it comes to load times. I've heard many times that Wrath of Cortex loads are an impossible puzzle that cannot be deciphered.
Yeah, so for the longest time, Wrath of Cortex, like for the leaderboard is loadless because there's no way that's ever going to be fair in real time. And they had these spreadsheets of load times. Like, okay, so if you have this version, this is what your loads are, and they're consistent. And when I got the Xbox version, and I timed a couple of my loads based off of what was on that spreadsheet, I was just like, you liars, because that is not consistent. It differs by like every console, and it differs by like every disc. Like my PS2 copy of Wrath of Cortex is super shot, so I'm convinced my loads are longer than normal. And from what I've heard, this is a problem with a lot of 6th gen games. I remember Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets had to switch to loadless because the loads for that game were not consistent. So
yeah, optical media is real special. Is
definitely
is a thing that we've all discovered.
Like we're like back on like the like HD Crash side with the Insane Trilogy, Nitro Fueled, and 4. We've had one guy named Tomadin who's just come in and like made visual based load removers for all 3 of those games, and especially for like Crash 4, where we didn't think that was going to be possible just because of the way those load screens work. Like he made it work, and like we're truly blessed to have him, because I feel like the games would not be as active as they are without that load remover.
No,
and like it's really unfortunate that like the Wrath of Cortex load remover, it's definitely a lot more rough around the edges. And I know the guy who made it, CD Ramatron, is like wanting to update it soon, but like the nature of how those loads look and what we define as loads makes it so complex to make one. And I feel like that's the biggest hurdle with running that game, is that at least for the time being, you basically have to manually time your loads, and nobody wants to sit through that.
No one wants to manually time loads.
Yeah,
that's absolutely true.
That's definitely one of the biggest reasons I don't actively run it. Is just like I don't want to sit there and manually time loads, and I don't want to struggle to set up the load remover. So like when I do run it these days, I'll just run it in real time and then just not even submit it. Just
So we've already talked a fair bit about Crash 2, because that was, again, a game that was foundational to you playing video games, period. Yeah. And also, your first speed run. Now the video of this that I watched was the time capsule GDQ hotfix recording, doing 100%. Now I've had the opportunity to talk with a few people about Crash 2 already, but I wanted to ask you, is there a favorite bit of tech that you'd want to talk about with this game, just to say like, oh yeah, this is a thing that keeps me coming back to this game?
Jetpackless.
Jetpack, okay.
Yeah. So I don't know if like whenever you've talked to anybody about the Crash 2, they've mentioned that.
I don't think it's come up. I don't. Yeah. I mean, usually I'm the one who's trying to watch the videos to figure out the tech. So if it hasn't come up, it's probably because I haven't played the game in the past 20 years and known enough to bring it up and be like, oh, what happened to the jetpack?
Yeah, so in level 24, Pack Attack, you can also do it in Rocket, but it's not faster in 100%, so it's only done in Pack Attack. If at the beginning of the level, there's like an invisible wall that when you hit it, it triggers the animation that puts you on the jetpack. And what you can do basically is you can do a neutral slide spin, and you can basically kind of like get up to the trigger, and then while you're at it, you pause the game, and you basically like pause buffer, and you like match between pause and square. And if you time it properly, you'll get a neutral slide spin, and it'll push you through the barrier and past the trigger, and you can finish the level on foot. And it saves about 15 to 20 seconds, because at the end of the level, there's another trigger. And I have explained this wrong before, and I'm going to try and remember the way that Das, another member of the community, explained it to me. So hopefully I get this right. If not, I'm sorry, Das. But at the very end of the level, like right where the crystal is, the way the level works is that there's another trigger at the end of the level that takes you off of the jetpack. And when that trigger loads in, if you're on foot, the game will push you behind it. So because it thinks you're supposed to be like past that wall.
Yeah.
So what happens is that you kind of position yourself to a point where you can do like a spin jump, grab the crystal as it's pushing you back to the end of the level, and then you can land on the platform. It just skips the entire like last chunk of the level. So like that, combined with just the mere concept of being able to finish the level on foot, like makes me adore everything about that trick.
No, that's neat. It's really, when you could put a bunch of things together to sort of eliminate an element like that, that does really feel like just sort of exquisite, chef kisses fingertips.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's sort of the element to speedrunning. All right, then. So I wanted to get one more say on Crash 2 there before I moved on to Crash 4. With Crash 4, I noticed that you are one of the speedrun.com moderators for this leaderboard. I mean, among other leaderboards.
Yeah.
And I love asking for a game like this. Crash series has an active speedrun scene, and chances are there are going to be people interested in speedrunning this. Do you feel like you had any takeaways about being part of a moderation team for a new game that was likely to have people submitting? Like, what do you have any advice or any be like, wow, we did this and it was a great idea, or it wasn't a great idea?
It's definitely going to be a lot of ups and downs. Like, because the first game I moderated was the Insane Trilogy, and that was very much a case where during the height of that game coming out and people discovering stuff about it, I was very much at like the front of the line, just like constantly like learning things about the game, finding things about the game. And it eventually reached a point where Pete, the player, one of the like series mods, was like, yeah, I'm gonna mod you for NST because you've been putting in like more work than anybody else. And like we've had to make a lot of decisions with NST, especially when the PC version came out, and there was like a lot of headaches with that because like I think Jay Haas mentioned this when he was on the podcast. Like the PC version is faster because it runs at 60 FPS. So we had to decide: are we going to split the leaderboard, or are we going to keep it all on one? We ended up keeping it as one leaderboard because while the difference is there, and while like most people run on the PC version, they can kind of compete with each other. Like a lot of the records at this point, I don't think you can necessarily get them on console, but you can get close to them. So we ended up like that was the decision we ended up doing. Like we found a lot of like crazy glitches that could have potentially like dramatically changed every category, but we weren't sure if they were strictly glitches that would be allowed. Like we found a glitch that we call file fusion, where like you load a Crash 2 file while you're playing Crash 1, for example. And we were like, should we allow playing a game that's not Crash 1 in Crash 1? And we eventually had to decide that no, we're not going to do that. Like, we've had to deal with so many headaches with that. We had to deal with a lag strap being found. Like, you're going to have situations where you're going to have to make a hard decision where there's not necessarily a right answer, and somebody's probably going to be upset. But like, that's just part of the job. Like, ultimately, you need to do what is best for the game and the best for the community. And regardless of whether or not it is a decision that people like, if it is the decision that you think is correct, then go for it. Like, even just like dealing with, like, you know, every community has like problematic people, and we've had to deal with problematic people in the past, and like, you don't like being in those situations, but it's just something you got to do.
When it comes to like verification workload, do you have any thoughts about that, and you know, how many people to have involved around? Because I feel like that's one of the things I worry about. One of the last times I had an extended discussion about moderation on the podcast was with Maxi Lobes, who was someone who was verifying the Resident Evil 2 remake with moderation for that when that came out. Of course, that was, you know, huge speedrun scene when in the first few months that game was around. I don't know. I'm not going to bother trying to speculate on you know, how many runs of one there were compared to the other. But with either NST or 4, was that an experience where you're like, oh my god, that people just keep submitting runs? Like, what do we do?
For NST, for a while, it was really active, like especially during the PS4 days. Like, just daily, there'd be like 5+ submissions. It eventually tapered off, and like nowadays, like, you still get like a good number of submissions daily with it, but a lot of them are time trials.
Okay.
Crash 4 definitely had that early activity of like everybody was submitting, but I feel like it kind of died down more quickly than NST did, which might be a combination of like it's less accessible than NST because NST is on the PC. But and I think it might also just be a factor of like people just seem to be really gravitated towards the Insane trilogy, maybe because they're a bit more like nostalgic. Crash 4 is notoriously very difficult, and just like things like that. Generally, like, I think with each game we have about 4 or 5 active mods, and I think it's a really good balance because if anybody's not available, one of the other 4 is. So like the runs don't really stay there for long. Like, if you submit a run, like, at most it might take us 3 days to get to it, but usually within like 24 hours it's verified.
Well, let's talk about Crash 4 itself, because I was watching your run, which was a run from it was any % from Thunderthon, with the Winter Wonderland. Was it Wonder? What was the name?
Winter Wonderland 2, I think.
Okay,
it was their winter marathon.
Yes, and very good overlay. I've now watched a few Thunderthon VODs without actually having seen the event live myself, and I feel like I need to catch the next one live because it seems like they're doing a pretty good job.
It was definitely really fun. I enjoyed it.
And so you uttered an interesting opinion during your run, which was that you feel that Coco is best Bandicoot. Could you elaborate on this for me?
So, like, it's kind of a thing that, like, if I'm known for anything, is that Coco is my favorite character in the franchise. I don't actually really have much of a reason aside from being, I guess I'm kind of in touch with my feminine side and like things that are cute. And like, she's kind of just a cute, sassy character, especially in the remakes. Something a lot of people might like, for as much as I really like Coco as a character, like, I actually didn't start liking her until the Insane trilogy. I feel like in a lot of the like 6th gen era games, she was either really bland or really annoying. Like in Crash Tag Team Racing and Crash of the Titans, she is obnoxious. But if you go to like CT, like the original CTR, which is the first game where she really has like a semblance of a personality, if you go to those, or if you go to the remakes, or even like Mind Over Mutant, because at that point I feel like the developers were kind of starting to get a feel for all the characters. Like, I feel like she's a lot more well balanced of a character, where like she's got like the sassy side to her, but she's not a brat. And like that's where like she's at her most distinct and also her most interesting, I feel. But like ultimately it just boils down to like I just like her for whatever reason. Like there's no like underlying like deep emotional connection. I just think she's a cool character.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the aesthetic is all you really need. I mean, and for Crash 4, if I'm right, it is cosmetic, the differences between the okay.
The most you lose is that switching to her takes about 3 frames. It was nice because in the Insane Trilogy, it is actually slower to use Coco, not because of movement mechanics. Movement wise, in the Insane Trilogy, she is identical to Crash. It's just that in Crash 1 and 2, picking her up is slower because you have to go out of your way to do it. She can't enter every level in those games like Crash can, so you lose time on that. And then even in Crash 3, where it is optimal to pick her up because you have to alternate between them in the run, because there are some levels that Crash can only do and there's some levels that only Coco can do. But it's still beneficial to mostly use Crash because of just minor factors in both categories, any percent and 108%. When you leave a level and Crash or Coco throws up, a crystal, a gem, or a relic, one of 3 animations will play. So for Crash, he'll either he'll regurgitate it out of his mouth, he'll pull it out of his pants, or he'll bop it out of his ear. And then Coco's 3 animations are she'll pull it out of her laptop, she'll pull it out of her pocket, or she'll look for it and then it'll be on her back. That last animation is longer than the other 5. So if you play as Coco, there's just a 33% chance that you lose a third of a second every time you play as her. And in the long run, it's only if you play as her as little as possible, it amounts to maybe 15 seconds. But it's just, it exists.
Yeah.
And Crash 3 any percent in the Insane Trilogy is, if it's not the most optimized Crash run I've ever seen, it's up there. That category has just been pushed so far that small fraction of time does matter. And then in 108%, another thing is that there's a trick that we call is quick level reentry, because in 108% you have to do every level twice basically, because you have to do the time trials also. And you can actually enter the portal of the level you just exited before it closes. And both Crash and Coco can do a method where you buffer a slide jump and enter it before it closes, and it just lets you immediately re-enter the level, which saves a good 5 seconds. But Crash has another method that Coco, for whatever reason, can't do, which is on the black screen between loading and jumping out of the level, you can input a body slam and Crash will do it. So instead of jumping out of the level, he flops in front of it, and then you just immediately walk back in after he's done throwing all the items up. And not only is it significantly easier than the slide jump into the portal, it's faster. So for 108%, it is actually just faster to constantly play as Crash, except for in the levels where you have to play as Coco. So for me, I'm just well, that's a little tragic because I really like Coco, but it's faster and it saves time, so I got to do it. But when I was running Crash 4, I was okay, I lose a tenth of a second to switch to Coco, so I'm going to play as her.
No, that's a good answer. Sometimes when you're speedrunning, you have to find your own room for defining your style of playing the game.
Oh, definitely.
So one more Crash 4 question then would be, being a game that came out while you were already very active in speedrunning compared to, say, Crash 2, which were some of the routing optimization was probably done before you got into speedrunning. Did you have a hand in routing and discovering things in Crash 4? And is there anything that you'd want to brag about as something that you helped put in place in the current route?
For Crash 4, it's all a bunch of minor stuff because Crash 4 follows a linear level of progression like Crash 1 does. To get to the next level, you have to be the level you're at. It's not a warp room style, so there's actually no routing in Crash 4 any percent in that regard. As far as level-based strats go, there's actually a lot of skips in that game. I didn't really find any of them. So for me with Crash 4, it really was probably just really minor corner cuts and stuff that just kind of happen over time would probably be my contribution to that. There are a handful of stuff in the Insane Trilogy where I can point to that and be I found that. I'm happy about that. A lot of the routing in Crash 2, because for the longest time I was the only person actively running Crash 2 NST. So a lot of the routing was my own doing. A lot of cycle skips were my own doing. And then eventually when other people started running it with the PC version, they took what I had done and made it better. But there's definitely things in that game that I can confidently say I left my mark on. There's there's a hob slide in Unbearable, and then there's a hob slide in Ding in it. That like both of those were kind of things that I ironed out, and then other people just started doing them better. For example.
Cool. I mean, honestly, for so much like small incremental stuff, I think watching the Crash 4 VOD, one of the things I was really impressed by was the number of skips and corner cuts and other things, and there's a lot. It's like constantly the corners keep getting cut and they don't stop getting cut.
Yeah, and for Crash 4 especially, the number of skips it has is pretty unprecedented for a Crash game. Like, Crash games are generally mostly known for just like the optimized movement, and like you got a handful of skips here, with Twinsanity being the noticeable exception. Twinsanity is just such a different game that I almost don't even consider it like in the same series in terms of speedrunning. But like Crash 4, like there's 6 levels with skips, and there was actually a skip discovered a few days ago by Crody that in the third to last level, Nitro Processing, we already had a huge skip in that level, and then he found another one, and it actually just took 30 seconds off of that level. So like that game is still evolving, even though like I haven't done a run of it in a month, but like the active runners are still just going crazy with it. It's really cool to see, and it's even especially cool to see in the like watching it from the sidelines. Because, like I said, like with Insane, especially with Insane Trilogy, and like with a little bit at the start of Crash 4, I kind of felt like I was in the position. It was like, well, somebody has to lead the charge, so I guess I'll do it, even if I don't want to. With Crash 4, like there's definitely been people who have been taking the charge, even when I'm not. So it's nice to finally just like sit back and watch it develop, even though I'm not the one doing it. And it's just really nice to see, because like Crash 4, I think it's a really cool speedrun, and I think it's a very good one. But I do have issues with it, and one of them, I think this was also something that Jay Hobbs mentioned when like, because you sent me his podcast to like look over. It does, to me, kind of overstay its welcome. It's a very long run for an 90%. Like I run it on PS5, and in real time, my run is still a little over an hour and a half long. And then like my Twinsanity PB or my Crash 2 PB are like for 100% are an hour 21 and an hour 16 respectively. So like for an 80% run to be that long, and for Crash 4, which is such a brutal game, like that game is definitely the hardest like Crash game out of like the main series, I feel. It's just like it's very draining, and I can only do it for so long. So it's really nice to be able to watch other people go at it and see how they're doing it without feeling like I'm obligated to have to do it. Because a lot of Insane Trilogy, just at least during the PS4 era, it really felt like a lot of people were not looking at the game positively. Like they didn't respect it as a run, or just like it's just not good, it's not worth it. So like there, I felt like it's like I have to do this, because if I don't, nobody else will. So, and then like thankfully by the time PC came out, like the NST community like was a lot more active. Like PC definitely benefited that game a lot, and finally at that point again I was able to like step back and watch other people do it, and like I'm glad I was able to do that with Crash 4, because again, like as we established earlier, like for my own personal goals, if it ends up being record, then sure, I'll go with it, but it's never something I go for. And when I'm actively looking to try and get record, that's kind of the point where I stop enjoying it. So it's nice to see that other people are going for it, and I can just observe how it evolves. And I feel like that's kind of just the role I've reached in the community, and I'm definitely super happy with it.
Yeah, and like into, and I'm sure I think this fits in with what you're saying, that being able to have another set of eyes or multiple sets of eyes on the game is only going to improve the speedrun. It's only going to benefit the game for you who already played it, for the people currently playing it, and for everyone else after. Yeah,
definitely. Like it was so rough doing like NST2 on PS4, just because I was the only person really looking at it, and then the PC version came out and suddenly a bunch of eyes were on it, and the run just got so much more optimized, which was in part due to PC just being that much faster. Especially, like, I feel like PC benefits 2 the most out of the 3, just because there's so many more opportunities to hob slide, and that's really just a huge bulk of the time save in Crash 2 compared to 1 and 3. But like really, just having those eyes and like people doing things where I'm just like, I didn't even think of that. Like, it definitely really helps. Like, it's really difficult being the only person pushing a game.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. It's you run out of motivation real quick for that. All right,
Yeah.
let's start to wind down, move towards the exit of the podcast script proper. One of the things I like to do for the interview series is to add a little connective tissue, and the way I do that is I get a question from my previous guest for my next guest, and so on. And so Wolsk last week had this question, which is, and this does not have to be a game that you speedrun, but is there a game that you have in mind which you would like to see speedrun blindfolded? If you could have a blindfolded speedrun of any game, what would you want to see?
That's hard.
No,
like, I feel like it would be a Crash game, but like just the way those games are, it's really rough. Just 'cause, like, because of just how many factors are going on and how, like, sometimes the game just does something wild to you. I feel like adapting is one of the most important factors of those games. I feel like that'd be really hard to do with a blindfold. Maybe I'll reach really deep for this one. A blindfolded run of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone on PS1 would be interesting.
that would be fun. I agree. That would be fun to watch.
Yeah, you might hit a problem with like visual-based RNG stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a really hard one to pick from.
Well, in that case, I do need from you then a question for my next guest. Now, you know the guest will be a speedrunner, and I'm not going to tell you who the guest is. The question does not have to be about speedrunning. It can be about whatever you want, but it will be a speedrunner answering it during a podcast like this.
Do I have to think of it now?
Well, you don't. I mean, think about it. I would like to have it by the end of the podcast. If you feel like you really truly cannot, I have once previously allowed someone to come back after the podcast and give it to me in DM. But
so it's just like a general speedrunning question for whoever's next, I guess. All right, let me think of that. I'll think about it and try to have it by the end of the podcast.
Okay. So, well, in this case, the next question is, are there any upcoming games that you are keeping an eye on and you're excited to play?
The Switch port of Super Mario 3D World.
Yeah.
Like,
that's like next week, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
3D World is absolutely my favorite Mario game, and it's one of the biggest reasons I've kept a Wii U all these years. So basically, when they announced the Switch, I've been asking for a 3D World port for the past 4 years. So now that it's finally happening, I'm absolutely all over that. I also just recently started playing Blue Fire. It's an indie platformer that's on the PC and the Switch. So far, that one's been really fun.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people talking about that one. And I know 3D World was like, it was probably like the game that was still stuck on Wii U, and now we have one fewer of those, and we're down to like Xenoblade Chronicles X or something.
Yeah, I guess like Wind Waker HD, if you want to count that, even though it was a GameCube game first. So
okay, no, those are good answers. I hope that all the people, because I definitely have listened to a few that love 3D World. I hope the port is great. That's all I gotta say.
I want it to be amazing. Like I will pour so many hours into that game.
Next question is, if you could put more eyeballs on some speedrun streamer, who would it be? Who do you feel like deserves a shout out and should have more attention?
There's so many answers for this one. Can I give more than one?
Yeah, you can just list off a few people if you want. It's
so one of them I've seen him, he's in the chat right now, is Merkaz. He's another one of the moderators for the HD series. He does so much work for the community behind the scenes, and like he has his own stuff going on, so he doesn't have like a completely consistent stream schedule, but every time he does, it's like he's just a great guy, phenomenal streamer. So like everybody should definitely follow him. Dill Wingo is another one. He's one of my best friends. He's been going really hard on Ratchet and Clank 2 for the past year. He actually just ran it at GDQ. Tet W would be another one. He's like definitely like the top Crash 1 runner for the original game. He actually just he just beat the world record again a few days ago. Like he was just doing practice runs and just got a 1 hour, 2 minutes and 36 seconds. Like I could go on and on with like so many people that you should watch. Like there's so many Crash runners that are really great and I feel deserve so much more recognition, because like I feel like Crash streams in general have been on the uprise. Like we've definitely had a lot of like people get partner, like Rex got it like about a year ago, HypnoShark got it, Potty just got it like a week or two ago. And then like even on like the Spyro side, you know, you have Dale, man, his stream just absolutely exploded in the last month. So like it's nice to see people have this interest in, you know, Crash and Spyro runs, because for the longest time it was a really like small, like more obscure community, I feel. And like I'm definitely like, I feel like I'm not like quite partner level, but I feel like I'm on like one of the higher end of view count, where I get a pretty consistent like strong viewer base. And I feel really fortunate in that regard, and I would love to see like so many other runners have it also, especially because like, you know, you get those people who are just like, oh, you're a god, you're like the greatest Crash runner I've ever seen. I'm just like, there's about like 20 other Crash runners who are just as good as I am. Like you guys should definitely watch them too.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's always the case with any sort of scene, you know, that it really is a community, and there's a lot of people involved. That it's never just like one person who's going to represent a scene like that. And so, I mean, I will say, you know, I'll do a little shout out here to my longtime stream friend Arch Magus, who's in chat, who has pointed out a lot of the Crash runners to me. And so far they've all been great. So I've just been really impressed with the community.
Yeah, definitely. Like I could like, I feel bad because there's like, I mean, now I'm just thinking of more people to shout out. Like I could sit here for hours and just shout out all the Crash runners. Like they do just definitely all deserve it. But it's just like, there's so many of them that I couldn't possibly shout out all of them.
Well, in this case, plug your own stuff. Where should people find you?
So I'm pretty active on Twitter. It's at Rico_KSB. I mostly just post memes and funny things that I think of, and I'll tweet when I go live. I'll share pictures of my cat when she decides to be cute. And then on Twitch, I stream pretty much daily on Twitch, again at RicoKSB. And then I have a YouTube channel, but I only really use it to upload PBs and such. I've been wanting to like branch into doing like other videos. Like one of them that's been on my mind for a while is my interpretation of the Crash timeline, because every time I see someone try to interpret the Crash timeline, it makes me die a little on the inside, because they just forget so many. Like, again, this is kind of just like, I'm such a diehard fan of the Crash series. They just forget these minor details, and I'm just like, your timeline doesn't make any sense. So like that's something I want to do. I did a ranking of all the Crash games about like a year ago, or like half a year ago, and I would like to revisit it because I think it's a bit outdated now. But it's just stuff I would like to get around to, and I just haven't done yet. But basically everywhere I'm Rico_KSB.
Yep, and if you're here live with us, I put all those links into the chat, and if you are watching it after the fact or listening to it after the fact, you can check the description of the podcast or of the YouTube video, and you'll be able to find all of the links there to Twitch, Twitter, YouTube. Rico, thank you so much for giving me all your time.
Yep, and you still wanted the question for the next.
Oh yeah. Give me that.
I remember.
Yeah, go ahead. All right.
So this is one I just thought of, because it's one I've been asked a lot. Also, is what factor of a speedrun gravitates you to like wanting to learn it? Whether it's like the movement or the skips and the glitches and tech and such like that. Because I feel like every speedrun is very different, and you know, at least for Crash runs, it's a lot of movement based stuff. But I'm also definitely gravitated towards things that clearly should not happen, but they do, and it's cool. So
All right.
So I think that'd be a good question for
no,
the next
that's
guy.
good. That is a pretty solid one. All right. So we're gonna end the formal part of the podcast. If you're here with us live, in just a second, we'll start doing some live Q&A. So if you have questions for Rico, put them in chat. But to conclude the formal part of the podcast, the thing that I need from you, I'm gonna say a cheesy catchphrase like "Let's boost on out of here," and when I say that, I need you to give me your best rocket engine noise.
Oh God. What does a rocket sound like?
I mean, that's up to you. This is your interpretation.
Okay. I was not ready for this.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for listening. Let's boost on out of here. Excellent.
It was good? Okay.
Yeah, it was good. You're good. All right, so that is the sort of formal part of the podcast. But folks, if I see some people in chat, hit us up with questions. Yeah, don't worry about being late. You can catch as much or as little of the stream as you want, always and forever, and that's okay. I mean, it's funny. I've had all sorts of interpretations of that. I mean, I think I've been doing the rocket engine thing since like episode 6 of OverBoost, so I've had a few takes on it.
I'll be honest, when you said rocket engine, my first thought was engine from Crash Bandicoot, and I was like, I gotta do a voice impression right now.
That would have been funny. I would have been caught by surprise, but it would have been good. Yeah, Merkaz, thank you. All right, Archie's got a thing here. Alrighty, the Crash IP has managed to keep fans and a steady core aesthetic, but varied greatly. Kart racing, twalk movement, twins levels, party game, for reinventing the 90s for the 20s. What shakeup would you want to see that doesn't compromise the core Crash experience?
So, like, obviously this is going to be subjective because what people consider shaking up the core Crash experience is such a wildly different thing depending on who you ask. I've seen people on Twitter say that Crash 4 deviated too much from the formula, and then I look at Crash 4 and I say to myself, this is the closest to the formula it's been in like over a decade. So I don't understand. I think, again, going back to Twinsanity, that game had plenty of great ideas and just didn't really have the opportunity to execute them well. So like if they wanted to go a bit more of like a seamless world, maybe not necessarily like an open world Crash game, because we have a lot of open world like games and platforms like that, but maybe one where like it seamlessly transitions across the entire narrative instead of being like level to level, and maybe being a bit more open for exploration, still following a mostly linear path, because at that point I feel like that's how Crash is defined, is just linear 3D platforming, and I feel like taking away from that takes away from Crash, so I do think the direction they went with Crash 4 and sticking to that was a good idea. But definitely, if they wanted to like shake it up by, you know, having a bit of a seamlessly transitioning world with a bit more like openness to it, like maybe think like not necessarily like, you know, Jack and Daxter style, but maybe like Spyro-ish, where like there's a central hub that has like a bunch of these openly explorable worlds. I think that'd be really neat. Ultimately, though, I think Crash has just kind of carved his niche as a series that is like 3D but linear, and therefore that kind of gives it its like unique charm, because there aren't a lot of like 3D linear platformers these days, I feel.
Yeah, no, I feel like if you ask me as someone who doesn't play a lot of 3D platformers, how would I define Crash? And I think that's exactly it, which is sort of and I don't mean this with a negative connotation, but a slightly claustrophobic 3D platforming experience, right?
Oh, like, yeah, definitely. That is very tunnel based, for sure.
Yeah. And so, and I mean, that was one of the things that impressed me about Crash 4. I mentioned earlier was all the corner cutting, and also just like the variety of corner cutting. Like I was really kind of impressed with like the dingo dial part. So I was like, this character is going to be the worst part of the speedrun, but actually, the vacuum cannon is cool.
So great.
Yeah. That was neat. All right. Well, we got more Archie. You started speedrunning a lot of games in various scenarios, old and popular, old and unpopular, new and very popular. Purely looking at community establishment and interest, what is your favored experience with learning and improving a run?
I don't know if I entirely understand what
Archie's I think what Archie's getting at here is let's say we compare the 3 runs, right? Because like Crash 2, old and popular, so you came to something that was already run, you played it, people are still interested in it. Crash Twinsanity doesn't, it's a divisive game, as you've said yourself, not quite as loved, but you still did work with it. And then, with new and very popular, I feel like you had more of the NST 4 experience where it was active and popular. And so I think maybe, if I'm understanding right, Archie's asking sort of like, what did you prefer?
Which of those 3 did I prefer?
Yeah, what are those scenarios? Like, if there were another Crash game out there, would you want a new Crash game just like this, or I mean, in terms of like running, like purely running, like of course we want new video games that are fun, like that's but like just in terms of the speedrun perspective, or would you rather be like, oh man, there's another Twinsanity just waiting in the wings for me to find ridiculous out of bounds and whatever, But people are going to come in the chat and complain about it.
Yeah, basically. I feel like there's like positives and negatives to all of it. Like with Crash 2, it's old and popular. It's like so much of it is already known. So when you're getting into it, like you experience all these things and you're like, oh, has anybody seen this? And the answer is almost unanimously yes, this is known. But because it's like such an established run, you have an idea of where it can go and you have an idea of what you're ultimately capable of doing. Mm-hmm. And because it's established, like it's very easy to, like get into it because precisely like, okay, this is the best idea because everything else has been tried. With Insane Trilogy and with 4, there's definitely like, it's really fun having that experience of like watching the game evolve and see how it changes. There's definitely some growing pains to it because just like, oh, something I did before turns out to be obsolete. I definitely experienced that a lot with NST and 4. And then with Twinsanity, it's just so obscure that like I don't even know how to describe that one. It's just such a that one's probably like kind of like the Crash 2 experience where like a lot of the stuff has been established, but I guess it's not quite as established. Like a lot of more often with Twinsanity, like you might hear an answer of like I don't know. I guess the one I favor the most is like, even though I ultimately didn't really stick with NST or 4, and like I'm not really active in either of them, having that new game to explore was definitely really fun. Just seeing how it changes over time. Like it's been so fascinating, even right now, watching how Crash 4 is changing. But even just seeing how Insane Trilogy evolved in 3 years, which is like still like pretty short of a time. Like, like if you watch like the first time Crash 3 NST was in a GDQ when J-Hobbs did it, and then if you watch like the second time where it was like a race, and then if you watch the third, and then if you just watch a run now, like it's 3 wildly different things, but those runs are all within a year of each other. So just watching that evolution, I think, is like the coolest part about a new game, which is why I think it's always exciting whenever one comes out. So I would say that might be my favorite experience, is just having a new game.
No, folks, if you do have any questions, throw them in. So we're on the front page until a few more minutes. I might as well ask, can you tell me about your cat? Maybe perhaps a name and origin story.
So her name's Coco.
Okay.
So I'd been thinking about getting a cat for about a year at that point. And it was more just like I just didn't get around to it, and I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to take care of a pet and all this.
Sure.
And then I have a friend that I met through both my work and my dad, and she helps with a lot of rescues and such. And earlier in the year, for a different cat, she had said, "Hey, I got a kitty cat for you if you're like interested in adopting her." I was like, "Sure, I'd be down to like see how she is." And then that's when the pandemic hit, so that just ultimately went nowhere. But then about the end of October, she messaged me, she's like, hey, I've got another cat for you, and sent me a picture of her, and I was like, she's beautiful. So I was just like in love immediately, and I went to see her. You know, she was pretty like docile. Like, she's not really aggressive or hostile. But there's definitely been some growing pains in the transition, because she's 4 years old, and she's a former feral, and those are, from what I've been told, the hardest ones to adjust. So, but even then, I've seen the adjustment. Like, she's still not really super friendly. Like, if I try to like get near her, she'll hide. But like, she started approaching me more. Like, this morning I woke up and she was just like at my bed, and, like, probably wanting me to feed her. So it basically was, my friend just messaged me, hey, you want a cat still? And I was like, yeah, sure. And then I just went for it. And then it's just been months of me, trying to, just get her adjusted and all that. And it's definitely a work in progress, but she's getting there. And the reason I named her Coco, aside from just like referencing the Bandicoot, was there's a line in Crash 4 in one of the flashback tape levels that like they detail the origin of like Crash and Coco as they were being trained by Cortex before they like betrayed him. Mm-hmm. And one of the trials when you play as Coco is being run by Engine, but Engine doesn't know that Coco's a Bandicoot, so he keeps calling her a cat. So at the beginning of the trial, he's just like, attention, cat, I am going to be the one running your trial today. And Cortex is just like, for the last time, it's not a cat, it's a Bandicoot. And it's just like, it doesn't even look like a Bandicoot. And then just like at the very end, he just goes, yes, nice bowl of milk waiting for subject to end the trial. And you just hear Cortex groan. So aside from her just kind of looking like a Coco, I was like, this is just too perfect. Because like it's a cat. So that was like one of the reasons I went for that. The sun is like really in my eyes right now.
Yeah, I feel like you're slowly sliding into a film noir during this podcast. You got all you need is a little smoke in the air, and you'll be ready.
We got that nice throwback to like the 40s detective mysteries. My blinds are not really good at blocking the sun.
I mean, that's Venetian blinds. I don't know. I have the deep luxury of being a homeowner, which means I get to have problems like being annoyed with blinds at all times forever for the rest of my life.
All right. I'm in an apartment, so I got what they gave me.
Right. No, yeah, I've been there. All right. Well, in that case, I think that about wraps up our experience of the podcast. Do you have a rate target that you would have in mind?
Let me see. Let me see who I follow that's live right now. I got the perfect raid target.
Ooh, all right. Lay it on me.
So the runner is Cookie Naval. He is a Crash 1 NST speedrunner who just got the 105% record yesterday.
Ooh.
And he has been going at it for a long time, so it has been great to see him finally break that barrier. And he is currently doing all gems, because I think he's going for that record now.
Can you give me the link in either chat or the DM?
Yeah, I will. I'll DM you.
So I'm gonna make sure I get that username right. There we go. Okay, yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, so
that was gonna be my guess, but
yeah, he is absolutely. He is somebody that I would also shout out as a runner that you guys should follow. He's been going hard at Crash 1 for like the better part of a year, I want to say. Mm-hmm. And it's been really great seeing him evolve as a runner. That's another like one of my favorite things about like the new games is seeing the new faces just at the top, because like it really is like a different group of people with every Crash game. Like with NST, it was like, it was me and like a handful of other runners, and then Crash 4 is a complete new breed. You got like Crispy Tacos, who him and Damosk are currently like trading the world record in that category, and then you got like a handful of other runners who are going at it. So like really, like if you like for Crash runners, just like go to the leaderboards and just like see all of them. Like they're all worth watching. I couldn't possibly name all of them.
Well, I'm gonna let you go so I can spring the raid here. Thank you again, and hopefully I'll see you around in the future.
All right, thank you for having me.
Peace. Take care.